No Netflix. No 3 a.m. baby monitor glowing blue across the ceiling. No pediatrician's number saved in your phone. No formula tin in the cupboard. No lactation consultant on speed dial. No anonymous parenting forum where you can quietly type, "Is it normal that I don't feel anything yet at 2 in the morning?" Strip all of that away. Strip the walls away too. Strip the roof. Now you are sitting on packed earth, somewhere in what we'd one day call the Dordogne Valley, about 40,000 years ago, and there is a newborn in your lap. The baby is small, smaller than you expected. The cord has been cut with a flake of flint and tied with sinew. Outside, the wind is doing that thing wind does in winter, where it sounds almost like a voice. Your milk hasn't come in yet. Your hips ache. The other women in the band are watching you from the edge of the firelight, and you can feel that watching like a hand on your back. And here is the question almost nobody asks about deep prehistory, the one that makes anthropologists go quiet for a second when you bring it up. What if you looked down at that baby and felt nothing? What if you didn't want it? What happened then? Because we tend to imagine prehistoric motherhood as this unbroken instinct, a kind of warm biological autopilot that switched on the moment the baby arrived. Cave mom, cave baby, cave bond, end of story. But the deeper you dig, into the bones, into the burial sites, into the behavior of our closest primate cousins, the more you realize that maternal rejection is not some modern moral failure. It is one of the oldest decisions our species has ever made. And it has been made quietly, in firelight, for at least 100,000 years. Let's go find it. Fast forward, actually backward, about 100,000 years, to a rock shelter near the mouth of what's now the Clayses River in South Africa. The people living here are anatomically modern. Same brain as yours. Same vocal tract. They are eating shellfish and small antelope. They are using ochre. They are, in every meaningful sense, us. And in the layers archaeologists have peeled back from this site, they have found something that doesn't fit the children's book version of prehistory. The infant remains, not buried with care, not laid out in any ritual posture, just present in the deposits in a way that suggests that not every baby born here was kept. The interpretation is contested, careful, hedged as it should be. But the broader pattern across many sites is hard to ignore. Infant mortality in the Paleolithic was staggeringly high. Some estimates put it near 40% before the first birthday. And not all of that was disease. This is the part where I have to say something honest. We think. The evidence suggests that some of those deaths were choices, not cruel choices. Not in the way a modern courtroom would frame them. Choices made by women who had 3 other children clinging to them, who hadn't eaten properly in 2 weeks, whose bodies were telling them in a language older than language itself that this baby, this one right now, was not survivable. Anthropologists have a clinical phrase for it. They call it selective neglect, and it shows up in nearly every traditional human society we have ever studied carefully. The Ach of Paraguay, the Kong of the Kalahari, Inuit groups in the high Arctic before contact. In each case, when researchers actually sat down and listened, the women told them, sometimes through tears and sometimes very matter-of-factly, that there were births where the decision was made. Quickly, privately, before milk came in, before a name was given, that this child would not be raised. And here's the part that should stop you for a second. It was almost always the mother's call, not the chief, not the husband, not the elders, her. Now travel forward. A lot forward, about 97,000 years. Travel to 500 BC, to a hillside outside Sparta. The Greeks, civilized, literate, philosophical, the people who will eventually give us democracy and geometry, and the word ethics, have a custom that modern tourists do not put on postcards. When a baby is born, the father carries it to a council of elders. They look at the baby, they make a decision. If the baby is judged unfit, sickly, deformed, the wrong shape, the baby is exposed. Left on a hillside. The Greeks have a word for the place. Apothete, the deposits. The Romans had their own version. A newborn would be placed on the ground at the father's feet, and the father would either lift the child up, accepting it into the family, or turn away. If he turned away, the baby was abandoned, often at a known location near the city, where slave traders and childless couples would come looking. There is a Latin word for the lifted child, tollere, to raise. We still use it. We tend to read these moments and recoil. How could they? Those poor babies. What kind of culture? But notice what these classical societies have done that the people at Classes River, 95,000 years earlier, did not do. They have taken the decision away from the mother. In Sparta, it is a council. In Rome, it is the father. The deep time pattern, the woman in the firelight, her body, her judgment, her grief, has been overwritten by something more institutional, something more public, something that feels, frankly, colder than the cave. This is where the moral weight starts to shift, because we tell ourselves a story that human civilization is a long climb upward, away from prehistoric brutality, toward modern tenderness. But when you actually line up the evidence on this specific question, what happens when a mother does not or cannot accept her newborn? The climb does not look like a climb. It looks like a swap. One kind of difficult honesty replaced by another kind of organized denial. And here's where it gets stranger. Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy, the anthropologist and primatologist, has spent decades arguing something that, when she first proposed it in the 1990s, made a lot of people deeply uncomfortable. Her claim, in plain language, is this: maternal love, the unconditional kind we treat as biological bedrock, is not actually unconditional in humans. It is conditional. It has always been conditional. And the conditions are exactly what you would expect from an evolutionary standpoint. Is the baby healthy? Is there food? Is there support? Is there another child still nursing? Is the timing survivable? Horty points out that human mothers, unlike most other primate mothers, hand their babies to other people within hours of birth. Aunts hold the baby. Grandmothers hold the baby. Older siblings hold the baby. We are, in her phrase, cooperative breeders. And cooperative breeding has a dark mirror. If the cooperation isn't there, if the aunts and grandmothers and food and shelter aren't there, the maternal commitment can quietly fail to engage. Chimpanzee mothers, by contrast, carry their infants almost continuously for the first 6 months. They do not hand them off. And chimpanzee infanticide, when it happens, is overwhelmingly committed by males, usually a new dominant male killing the infants of his predecessor. The mother fights, sometimes to her own death, to prevent it. Human mothers don't fight the same way. Sometimes, the evidence suggests human mothers were the ones making the call. That difference is not a flaw in our species. It is, weirdly, a feature. It is part of why we survived. The capacity to make the brutal arithmetic of, I cannot keep this one and the 3 I already have, is part of what allowed small bands of hunter-gatherers to persist through droughts, ice advances, famines, and migrations across continents. The mothers who couldn't make that call sometimes lost everyone. The mothers who could kept the line going. Which means, and I want you to sit with this for a second, you are descended from women who, at least once or twice in the long chain behind you, almost certainly made that decision. Now, fast forward 800,000. Much less than that. Travel to right now. A maternity ward in a modern city. A woman has just given birth. The baby is healthy. The room is warm. There is food in the cafeteria. There is a partner pacing in the hallway. And she looks down at this baby and feels nothing, or worse than nothing. A kind of flat, gray distance that terrifies her more than any pain she felt during labor. Doctors have a name for this now: postpartum depression. Postpartum psychosis in its more severe forms. In the United States alone, somewhere between 1 in 7 and 1 in 5 mothers will experience some version of it. And here is the part the brochures tend to skip. For a long stretch of the 20th century, the medical establishment treated this as a personal, moral failure, a defect of character, a failure of femininity. Women who admitted to it were sometimes institutionalized. Sometimes their children are removed. Almost always we're told, in one way or another, that something was wrong with them specifically. But if you take Hrdy seriously, if you take the Classes River evidence seriously, and the Kong interviews, and the deep cooperative breeding logic of our species, then postpartum ambivalence is not a malfunction. It is a signal, an ancient one, a signal that somewhere in the deep architecture of the human maternal brain, there is a circuit that is still running an assessment our ancestors needed it to run. Is the support here? Is the food here? Is the timing right? Can I do this? And when the answer the circuit returns is uncertain, the bonding response dampens, not because the mother is broken, because the system is doing exactly what it evolved to do in an environment it no longer recognizes. Now, here is where the moral weight lands hard. In the Paleolithic, that signal was usable information. A woman could act on it, grieve it, be held by her band through it, and try again next season. There was no shame structure built around it, because there was no institution above her telling her what her body's signal meant. In Sparta, the signal was overridden by the council. In Rome, by the father. In the Victorian era, by the doctors. In the 20th century, by the brochures, and the church and the magazines that told her to smile. In the 21st century, and this is the part that I think genuinely matters, we have invented the most isolated motherhood in the history of our species. The cooperative breeders are alone. The cousins live in another city. The grandmothers work full-time jobs. The neighbors don't know her name. The band of women in the firelight, the aunts who would have held the baby so she could sleep, the older sisters who would have read her body and known instantly that something was off. They have been replaced by a partner who also hasn't slept, and a pediatrician she sees for 15 minutes every 2 months. And we are still surprised when her ancient circuit returns the signal uncertain. The prehistoric mother who looked down at her newborn and felt the wrong thing was not a monster. She was a node in a network. Her ambivalence was data the network used. The modern mother who feels the same thing is running the same software on a machine that has had every other node ripped out of it. That is not her failure. That is ours. Here is where I have to be careful, because this is a video about deep history and not a policy paper. I am not arguing that prehistoric infanticide was good. I am not romanticizing the cave. There were babies left in the cold. There were mothers who never recovered from the choice. There were nights of grief that we cannot reach back through 40,000 years to comfort. But I am arguing this. The ancients, the real ancients, not the Spartans, not the Romans, the deep ancients in the firelight, understood something about maternal ambivalence that we have spent 2,000 years pretending isn't real. They understood that the bond is built, not born, that it needs food and rest and other hands and time, and sometimes it doesn't engage on the first day, or the first week, or the first month, and that this is not a verdict on the mother. It is a verdict on the conditions around her. The Greeks took the decision and gave it to a council. The Romans gave it to the father. The Victorians gave it to the doctors. We gave it to nobody, and then we left her alone with it. I think that's the moral contrast. The deep ancestors had a brutal system that was at least honest about what it was doing. We have a gentle-looking system that pretends the signal doesn't exist and then punishes the mothers in whom it shows up loudest. They named the decision. We named the mother. And before we close, I want to leave you with this. Because not every prehistoric baby was rejected. Most weren't. The same archaeological record that contains the unburied infants also contains the buried ones. And the buried ones, these are the ones that get me, are sometimes laid out with extraordinary care. There is an infant burial from Sunghir in Russia around 30,000 years ago, where the child was interred with thousands of ivory beads, a belt of fox teeth, mammoth tusk, spears longer than the child was tall. Whatever that child was to that community, it was loved. Loved in a way that took someone hundreds of hours of carving to express. So the deep time picture isn't cold. It's both. It's mothers who could not keep a baby, and mothers who covered a baby in 10,000 beads. The same species. Sometimes the same woman, across different births. That is what being human has always looked like. And here is the thread I want you to hold. Across the firelight and the marble, and the fluorescent hospital corridor and the apartment at 3 a.m. every mother who has ever looked at her newborn and felt the wrong thing. 40,000 years ago in the Dordogne, 2,500 years ago in Sparta, last Tuesday in a city you've driven through, is part of the same long, quiet lineage. Not a lineage of failure. A lineage of women in whom a very old circuit ran an honest assessment of an impossible moment. The cave mother is not gone. She is sitting in the dark right now, in 1,000 cities, waiting for somebody to bring her food, hold the baby, turn down the lights, and tell her what the firelight used to tell her without words. That she is not broken. That the signal is old, and that the band, even after 100,000 years, is supposed to come.